Alright, so today we are testing Star Wars Outlaws on the RTX 4070 Ti Super. What a stupid name. You'll notice that I got a new GPU for the channel to test, and this is it. And today we're playing it with 14600K CPU and 32 gigabytes of DDR5, 6400 megatransfers per second CL32 memory. And we'll be testing at 1080p, 1440p, and 4K. Now, before we get to the testing, I'm just going to be running around in this specific area. I don't want to give anything away about the game. And also, it's got a mix of not so heavy areas and then some heavy areas. All right, so let me just show you one or two things here regarding the settings that I do think you need to take note of. As when you start the game, it actually runs in 21:6. Okay, so if you want to have the full screen, it says cinematic display mode. This is not just for cinematics, right? This is actually the whole game. And then we do have DLSS, Intel, XeSS, FSR, everything. And then we do have frame generation and array reconstruction. Now, the two things that I want you to note here is that array reconstruction actually is quite heavy when it comes to performance. And then the upscaler quality as well, or the upscaler mode, you've got fixed and you've got biased. And this is the same as with Avatar, right? So biased, it just, I don't know exactly what it means, right? But it says upscaling, which is based on the fixed rendering resolution, but in addition, biases it towards 4K output resolution. And I think it upscales it more, right? But this also has a performance penalty. So I just want to show you array reconstruction here. So one thing is you can't disable ray tracing at all in this game, right? So you've got a few presets here to choose from, but when you go down to ray tracing, it's always the least you can use, or the lowest setting you can use is low, right? So that's not ideal. But let me just get back to our game here. So we've got, I mean, this is just on the high preset. So I just want to show you the difference when we actually start using ray reconstruction. In Cyberpunk, ray reconstruction is not heavy at all. Actually, in certain cases, it improves the frame rate slightly. But over here, so we're getting 206 frames per second here. I am using frame generation, that kind of stuff, but just for demo purposes. If we then go to video and we enable ray reconstruction, let's just go ahead and apply that. And we are going from 206 to 270, right? So it's a 15% hit, but certain areas definitely has or have a worse performance hit when you enable ray reconstruction. Now, whether you want to use it is entirely up to you. Anyway, so let's get to the testing here. I just want to show you the presets, and then I basically only test presets, right? It's obviously always better to use custom settings, but just for ease of use and for you guys to be able to replicate this at home, I use presets. Every preset enables film grain. Film grain looks terrible in this game. And these are the settings, right? We do also have RTX direct lighting and whatever, you can read what it says there. So it's just our dynamic illumination. So the lighting just looks better, apparently. So these are the advanced settings that get applied when you use the presets. We're on ultra, but you can still increase the ray traced settings here. You can increase this to ultra as well, but we'll just be using the presets and see what performance is like, right? So let's get right to it. Let's just reset our numbers. Just want to see, do we have ray reconstruction enabled still? I can't remember. We do. So I'm going to be testing with it off, right? And frame generation off, and we also won't be using any upscaling. Actually, let's just leave it on fixed, and then we'll just use native AA, which means DLAA, right? So now upscaling, you're at 1080p. Right, I know the intro was quite long, but I just needed you to have a look at the different settings there. So with the ray tracing, everything enabled here, not RTX GI, just normal ray tracing, and we are seeing around 90 frames per second here, and this is the more demanding area I spoke about. It drops into the 80s, so down into the 70s even. I'm not going to be testing too much here, just showing you what the performance is like. remember the performance that I show you, obviously I can't show you the whole game's performance, right? Unless you want a 60-hour video, we can do that. I don't mind, I'm planning on playing this game, but if you, performance will differ between areas. That's a given. I don't know who needs to hear it, but this is not definitively what the performance will be like for the rest of the game. Right, so 98 frames per second or 93 frames per second there for average. Our lows aren't that terrible. We only have 0.2% lows instead of 0.1% lows when we use CapFrame X. That's the other change that I brought into here. It's just I use it now for GPU busy deviation and stuff like that. But you can see our GPU usage is sitting at 98%, pretty much GPU bound. So let's just go ahead and see what the presets do here. So not there. If we go to ultra and then high, so we had 94 frames per second on average, right? And once again, you can see full VRAM gets enabled. I'm disabling that. It looks horrible. So, all right. I'm going to do the full run again, but we did see a slight gain here. We dropped into the 70s at times down here. There's not that big a difference between ultra and high when I tested earlier, right? But when we don't use ray reconstruction, there is actually a bit of a bigger difference between the presets. Ray reconstruction being this heavy, quite strange, but not that there are many games that actually support ray reconstruction, so there's not a lot of games we can go off. But I'm just using Cyberpunk as an example. It's definitely not heavy in Cyberpunk. So 94 frames per second previously, 108, 109 frames per second now. So a pretty decent bump to our frame rate there, just going to the high preset. And that's all we're going to be testing at 1080p preset wise anyway. So let's just go ahead and switch this back to ultra. There's a lot of settings, so this video might be long. Let's hope it doesn't get too long. So I just want to show you what our performance is like when we start using some upscaling here. So let's just go with DLSS quality. Not the biggest fan of using upscaling at 1080p, but you can do what you want. And there we do have the silly film grain. I forgot to disable it. It's immediately apparent. But remember we had around 94 frames per second average here. We are now definitely CPU bound. You can see our GPU usage is sitting at 90. We are seeing a lot of artifacts here for some reason. This is actually the first time I'm seeing some artifacting in this game. Weird. I know some people reported some artifacting and some weird stuff. A lot of people also complained about texture streaming. I haven't run into the texture streaming issue, but yeah, we are 120 frames per second, so almost the same as on the high preset, right? So ultra preset with DLSS set to quality. This is a pretty decent experience. So then if we then go ahead and enable frame generation, I keep on going to the wrong places here. So frame generation, we can just enable here. I'm doing everything real time, so if there are black screens in between, I will cut out the black screens, but I do everything real time. Just, some people do think that these benchmarks are fake, and I'm here to just do everything in real time to show you that it's not, right? So 160, 170 frames per second here, and the frame generation toggle now took care of our slight GPU, CPU bottleneck by interpolating frames, and you can see our GPU usage is pretty high. There are some areas where it will still drop, but anyway, frame generation, you like it or you don't like it, whatever. I'm just here to test everything. So 190 frames per second. So for those of you with the 240 hertz panel, this is something you can do. And then if we just do the same on the high preset quickly, and this time I'll remember to disable film grain, and we enable DLSS without frame generation, and then we'll test with frame generation as well. So previously we were seeing around 120 frames per second, I believe, just on the high preset without DLSS, and we are now pretty CPU bound again, but I do think we will see a bit of a performance. Why is that? That droid is in the way. So we will see a bit of a performance increase in the frame rate. Come on. And even though we are CPU bound, but it won't be as much, right? So definitely on the high resolutions, DLSS will make a bit of a bigger difference. The 14600KF is a pretty fast CPU, but not fast enough to keep the RTX 4070 Ti super pegged at 100% at 1080p, which makes sense. Okay, so still 120 something frames per second. So we didn't gain that much from enabling DLSS here. And then if we just enable frame generation, just going through everything, then we'll go to the Ultra preset and enable RTX DI, direct, indirect lighting, whatever it's called. And now you can see we are getting above 200 frames per second here with the frame generation enabled. I mean, it's definitely not necessary to enable frame generation if you do play with this GPU at 1080p, but it is nice to have. It's an option. I play all my games with frame generation enabled. I don't care about the slight artifacting that you do get here and there. It's pretty imperceptible to me, and if we do get a high enough frame rate, the input latency really doesn't matter too much. All right, so 215 frames per second there, but our lows are pretty bad, our 0.2% lows. So let's just go back to enabling the Ultra preset here. So not the biggest difference between the two presets, not like other games where we get half our frame rate, but over here we do see around a 20% cost to our performance. And I now just want to disable all of these. Just use native AA again. Sorry, it's a lot of settings, but let's just enable that RTX global illumination thingy. Let's get the RTX direct lighting. There we go. So we do have a bunch of presets here as well. It's off and low, medium, high, and ultra. So let's start off with ultra. I don't think this is going to go so well because this will be pretty heavy. All right, 48 frames per second. I'm going to stand still here and just go through the settings, not do a run for each. Now you can see our GPU power usage is sitting at 275 watts. At 1080p, that's a lot, right? The power limit is 285 for this. So let's just go ahead and change this down to high. So mid 40s we were seeing, and low 50s. Okay, it's not going to work to keep that open. Wrong button. And if we then just drop this down to medium, I don't think we'll be seeing 60 frames per second here, right? So let's just, oh, there we go. 60 frames per second on the medium RT preset. Remember, I did not reset the numbers, so now I did. Then that's why the lows aren't really accurate in the previous ones. So 60 frames per second here, but I mean, I just wanted to show you what the performance cost is. So we'll be testing on, let's leave it on high. Actually, let's leave it on ultra. Let's leave it on ultra. Who cares? So then we can just go to video again. We were seeing around 40 frames per second, right? 40, mid 40s. So 47, and let's see what DLSS can do here for us. I'm just going to use DLSS quality. It should get us 60 frames per second, I believe. Remember, ray tracing is very, very demanding, and we already have a ray traced options. It's just now additional RTX direct lighting. Not sure if that translates to path tracing, but if you want to see if it makes a difference, I don't think my recording quality is good enough for you to really do a comparison. I record in 1440p and only at 75,000 kilobits per second, so other channels might have a better comparison. Anyway, so 70 frames per second, but we had a lot of stuttering with the RTX DI. We did see quite a bit of stuttering, right? And then let's see what kind of differences we get with frame generation enabled here. I'm not going to use the DLSS quality, DLSS balanced, because we're already sacrificing quite a bit by using DLSS quality at 1080p, because the internal rendered resolution is then 720p. And frame generation brings us up to 120 frames per second, give or take, but there's a lot of stuttering. I don't know why. It did not do this previously when I was testing in the other area. Maybe we need to restart the game again. But the stuttering seems to be a little bit worse now. Still getting an average of 115 frames per second, but our lows are terrible due to the stutters. And I mean, definitely the game requires some patches. There are some issues, but I'm having a good time so far. A good time, I think that's what I said. And I really don't mind it. There are some issues, especially with the hair. Just look at the hair when we move the camera. They're not the best. All right, so 120 frames per second is possible. 1080p DLSS quality with frame generation enabled, and that's going to be it for 1080p, I believe. So let's move over to 1440p and repeat the tests. Now, for those of you who also comment, I need to change this to 60 or to 120 hertz, whatever. My capture card is only 60 hertz, and my daily monitor is 165 hertz, but obviously I need to match the capture card's refresh rate. I don't record anything local. Everything is actually recorded on a secondary PC. So let's go ahead and disable RTXDI and on the Ultra preset, right? And I think that's it. Ultra preset, make sure the DLSS is set to native, and I just apply every single setting just to make sure that everything does get applied. And if we disable frame generation, I think that's it, right? So 1440p native on the Ultra preset. Let's see. Right. Okay, it went up. We are seeing almost 60 frames per second. Now remember, we do have ray tracing enabled here. Not the most intensive ray tracing, I must add, because other games with ray tracing using these exact same settings, the Ultra preset 1440p native, you won't get 60 frames per second. So these people are just in the way. Kind of annoying. So 60 frames per second is doable, right? At native resolution, it will drop below 60 every now and again. I'm going to be doing this a little bit out of order compared to previously. Previously, I dropped down the presets first, so I'm going to just use DLSS for these first before I drop the preset. So let's use DLSS quality. Let's see. We're just above 60 frames per second, right? So that gives us a decent, almost 50% bump to our frame rate. We went from 60 to 90, and down here a little bit more demanding, still above 80 frames per second. So if you don't want to use frame generation, I mean, you can target 80, 90 frames per second with this GPU. It runs pretty well, I think. And visually, the game looks quite okay. It's actually the same engine as Avatar. It's the Snowdrop engine, and everybody went on about how good Avatar looked, and I agree, Avatar looked very good. And yeah, you can see just the one other thing to mention is that the VRAM allocated and VRAM used, I don't think it's an issue with lower end GPUs, because the game uses pretty much as much VRAM is available. This is a 16 gigabyte VRAM GPU, so that's why the VRAM used is quite high. If we test this on a 12 gigabyte GPU, it'll actually use around 10 gigs. So don't let that scare you. It will run on lower VRAM amount GPUs. So now that we do have around 90 frames per second, I think it's pretty ripe for us to enable frame generation here. Sorry about the black screens. As I said, the Elgato capture card takes a little while to catch up. But here we are. Let me just reset the numbers again. So 130, 140 frames per second here with frame generation enabled. This is actually currently how I'm playing this game. 1440p Ultra preset and DLSS quality, frame generation enabled, no RTXDI. Personally, it's heavy for me. RTXDI is just the same as path tracing. It's a bit heavy for me personally. I do enjoy my games with ray tracing, just not so much with path tracing. considering it's so heavy. But yeah, we are getting an average of 143 frames per second on the Ultra preset, which is pretty good, I think. And our lows aren't horrible, but our 0.2% lows would indicate some stuttering, right? So let's go ahead and disable all the upscaling stuff, and then we'll just drop this down to the high preset. We'll test the medium preset at 1440p as well, I think, and then we'll move to 4K. So let's just disable, we'll go native AA and frame duration. So this is where it black screens, right? Well, a black screen is better than a blue screen. And I think that's it. And then if we just go ahead and drop this down to the high preset and remember to, so now all of a sudden film grain stays off. No, there we go. So stupid. Okay. So we were seeing around 60 frames per second where the Ultra preset native. Now we're seeing around 70 frames per second. So not the biggest of difference between the two, percentage wise, quite a bit, but frame rate wise 10, 15, 20 frames per second, not the biggest of differences. Not like a Black Myth Wukong. There's a very big difference between ultra and high there. So all right, so 78 frames per second. Yeah, not going to be wasting too much time. Going to enable DLSS quickly, and then we'll enable frame generation, and then we'll test some oops, that's wrong button. So DLSS quality. Then we'll enable some RTXDI, direct lighting, RTXDL. DL or DI? Okay, whatever. 110 frames per second with DLSS set to quality. And down here we'll probably see 90 or so. Not the worst. CPU usage is at times a little bit high. Not extraordinarily high. We are seeing around 50% CPU usage, but I'm not used to seeing 60C on this CPU. Usually it hovers around 50 degrees Celsius. So the game is a little bit heavy on the CPU, as well, as you can see by the power, 117 watt there. All right, so 111 frames per second average on the high preset with DLSS set to quality. And then last test here is just with frame generation enabled, and it takes just a little bit of time to completely normalize. Then we're seeing 150 frames per second. Pretty good experience, I think, especially if you do have a high refresh rate monitor. The input latency for this game overall is pretty sharp. There's no input delay whatsoever. Even at 50 frames per second, it feels very responsive. Even with frame generation enabled, it's very responsive as well. There we have it, an average of 158 frames per second. Pretty decent, I think. So let's do last test at, I don't think it's necessary to go down to the medium preset, right? So let's go ahead and what did I want to do? So I wanted to test RTX GI or DL. RTXDI, that's what it says there, but it's dynamic illumination, not direct lighting. Okay, I'm an idiot. So ultra, I actually just want to see something quickly. We were seeing around 150 frames per second, and now we are seeing 90 frames per second just by enabling that. Okay, so you will have to use slightly more aggressive DLSS settings because input latency, I know I said the input latency is not the worst in this game, but when you do get a final output of around 90 frames per second, it does become a little bit noticeable with frame duration enabled. Okay, so let's quickly do what we need to do here. So I'm going to disable any of the upscalers, and also, oops, we want that, and then we want that, and then we want that. Okay, so native resolution, remember that's DLAA, so it just uses the DLSS anti-aliasing, no upscaling. Okay, so ultra preset, and we do have RTXDI enabled. Let's just apply this. And I don't think this is going to go well, and film grain is enabled. It's like immediately apparent. Okay, 22 frames per second, almost 30. So cinematic experience here, not ideal. The input latency still feels okay. Like, not the end of the world. Not the best, but not not horrible. So 28 frames per second there. And then if we then just go ahead and just play a little bit with the upscaling. Sorry, wrong panel here. So upscaling, let's see if it, if it actually changes. I don't think we'll hit 60 frames per second here with DLSS set to quality. So 50 frames per second. This is quite heavy, like really heavy. And I know there's going to be people asking, why don't I test this preset and that preset? I really don't want my videos to be too long. Sometimes they do get quite long, just to keep them a little bit shorter, I don't test every single preset. So let's just use the DLSS balance here, because I'm aiming for 60 frames per second before I enable frame generation. And like, we're not seeing that. And the stuttering with RTX direct lighting is horrible. It really is. So for now, maybe my recommendation would be to not use it. I'm not going to be using it. It's too heavy, and also it does introduce a lot more stuttering, as you can see by our 0.2% lows there. So let's go ahead and just, I don't know what we should do here. I think what we can do is just enable frame generation, there we go. So, and now we are seeing 95 frames per second, but still a lot of stuttering, a lot. Not ideal. But once it settles, it's not the end of the world, right? Then the stuttering is not that bad. It's just that initial first few moments after changing settings that the stuttering is actually quite bad. Right, so it's not terrible. It really is not terrible, except for the look at the frame time spikes. It's really not terrible. We are seeing around 90 frames per second, and I know I'm moving my mouse around quite a bit, but it's actually very responsive. It's not horrible. 90 frames per second with these settings, not the end of the world. I think I'm just going to restart the game, see if we can get rid of these stuttering, because it did not happen prior to my testing. I test everything before I start recording, and Murphy's Law, it always happens when recording. So going to restart the game, and then we'll be right back. Right, so we restarted the game. Let me just reset our numbers, and let's just see if the stuttering is better. Oh, come on. Like, it's really annoying getting stuck in these NPCs, yeah. This guy's going to stop me anyway. So the stuttering seems to not be as terrible. One thing though, in the menus, in the menu itself, and then also in the shop menu, we don't frame generation does not work. Okay, so just keep note of that. But it seems like a restart fixed some of the stuttering, or the worst. No. Okay. Wow, that was bad. Speaking to Sin. So RTXDI, DL, whatever, it's got quite it introduces quite a few additional stutters, and not the best. Alright, so I just want to quickly check one thing. So sorry, we are seeing, standing still here, we are getting 96 frames per second. So I just want to drop this down. We're on the ultra preset, right? So if we just drop this down to the high preset without film grain, if we what the performance impact is. I did disable film grain, but it's on, so not a lot, right? So going from ultra to high, using these settings, we gained 6-7 frames per second. Yeah, okay, whatever. It's like it's really nothing. Alright, so I think that's it for 1440p. Let's do some testing at 4K. Not going to be testing too much. Now actually the VRAM used is quite low. Quite strange. Anyway, so let's do some testing at 4K. I just need to increase the overlay size a bit because it is a resolution dependent. So 4K, I probably should have changed my settings before I did this. Okay, so let's disable everything here, native AA, and everything is very slow now because we still have the advanced ray tracing enabled. Yeah, I'm just going to go ahead and apply that, and we'll start off on the ultra preset. So 4K ultra preset without film grain. Jeez. Okay, so without film grain, 4K ultra preset native resolution, and I don't think this is, oh well, it's about as as what I expected. Actually, this is worse than I expected. I was seeing slightly higher frame rates earlier, but as I said, the performance in different areas definitely differ quite a bit. I mean, it's obvious, and just don't watch this video and think this is the performance you'll be getting throughout the whole game. Obviously, it won't be. Okay, so 33 frames per second. Now, if we drop this down, not drop this down, we off is just going to use DLSS quality here. I'm just going to be doing some testing here. So DLSS quality 56 frames per second. Sorry, I did not increase the overlay. I'll just zoom in on that, but I'll increase it now quickly. Okay, anyway, so now it's increased 57 frames per second. Let's see if we drop this down to DLSS balanced, if we can hit 60 frames per second. We should, I think. Like 4K Ultra, probably not the best idea with this GPU, right? 65, we're not going to be maintaining 60 frames per second, especially down here. So I dropped this down to high. Actually, there we go. Okay, I was almost surprised there. But 4K, the game looks plenty good at 4K. As I said, I'm using a second monitor to record my footage, and then it's got to pass through to a 4K monitor, and 4K looks plenty good. All right, so not the best of experiences here, but let's see what frame generation does here at 4K. Typically on these GPUs, like GPUs that aren't a 4080 or a 4090 at 4K, the frame generation does not do as much, right? So frame generation, DLSS frame generation at least helps more when we are CPU bound. Okay, so at 4K we are definitely not CPU bound, and actually it helped quite a bit. We are seeing around 90 frames per second now, 250 watts on the GPU power draw there. Still not 285 watt that it can do. This is the MSI Ventus version, the one that had the VBIOS issue at launch, but I did, since I got this GPU like not even a week ago, and I did update the VBIOS. This is actually pretty fine, right? 90 frames per second, input latency is good enough. The frame rate is good enough, and the visuals are good enough. Right, so 90 frames per second there. So I don't think we should be testing at or using RTX DI. So just going to apply the high preset here quickly, film grain off, and let's just disable all of these quickly. Let's see, we were seeing just about 30 frames per second on the ultra preset native, right? So now we are definitely seeing a little bit of a better boost to our frame rate there, going from 30 to 40. It's a 25-33% increase in our frame rate. So not horrible. The scaling definitely works better at higher resolutions. Remember 1080p and 14, well, 1080p we did not see that much because probably because we were CPU bound. Then 1440p not that much either, but a little bit more. But now we are seeing a decent bump. All right, so last thing here, I'm just going to use the medium preset quickly. So I want to see what kind of performance we get here. Actually, I'm sorry, I did not test DLSS here. So let's just do DLSS. That ticks me off. Let's do DLSS on the high preset, and then we'll just do the medium preset, and then on the medium preset we'll probably test RTX DI. So over here now we are seeing once again 60 frames per second. It might drop below 60 when we go down here. Actually, it holds 60. Impressive. So this will be a pretty decent experience if you do play at 4K and like you don't want to use too aggressive upscaling. DLSS quality as a 1440p resolution, upscale to 4K. Yeah. And if we then last one, just do frame generation quickly. Remember, reflex is disabled here, but once you enable frame generation, reflex should be applied automatically, right? That's typically, there we go. So you can't disable that. That's just DLSS frame generation doing its thing. But funny enough, on the high preset, we are seeing, with frame generation enabled, we're not seeing that big a difference between the high preset and the ultra preset. Without frame generation, we did see a slight increase. We dropped to 57, I believe, on the ultra preset, and we dropped to 60 on the high preset. So not that big of a difference at times. All right, so 90 frames per second, give or take. Whether you use the ultra preset or the high preset doesn't really matter. So last one, I'm going to leave DLSS, frame generation, all that kind of stuff enabled here just to see. So once again on the medium preset, like really not that big a difference in the performance at all. Right. All right. So on the medium preset, seeing 100 frames per second here, and now it's time for the big boy. We will be using the ultra preset, yeah. I don't think we will be seeing 60 frames per second. Not that far off, 50 frames per second. Game feels responsive still, which is very strange. 40 frames per second with frame generation enabled typically results in much worse input latency. And maybe it's because it's a third-person shooter. Maybe they did something with the input latency or how the game handles input latency. I don't know. It feels quite okay. Well, we did not see the biggest of stutters when we started enabling RTX DI again, right? So maybe the restart helped. So at 4K, you are, I mean, you can actually use up to DLSS performance, right? So let's use DLSS performance. It'll still look plenty good because it's upscaling from 1080p to 4K now. Let's see. Like it's not the biggest bump to our performance. We are seeing 60, 70 frames per second. It'll probably drop below 60 down here in this market area. Maybe not. Actually, it did not. But like I still advise people to aim for a higher frame rate before enabling frame generation, because I'm not sure if the responsiveness will actually keep up. Maybe there are some areas that are a little bit more demanding and you'll start to feel the input latency, but it's not horrible. Sorry if I'm making you nauseous. All right, I think that's going to be it for this video. I know it was a little bit longer than intended, but there's a lot of settings. I did not even cover all of them, but it was a lot of settings, and I think we covered most of it, but not all of it. But I think this will give you an idea what the performance is like. I think the game's performance overall is not too terrible, considering that we do have ray tracing enabled at all times. RTXDI quite heavy, so use at your own discretion. All right, thank you guys for watching. I hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, hit that like button, hit the subscribe button, and as always, we hope to see you in the next one.